Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Thank you for joining the 5th episode of the Andrea Holm podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Can you give people watching a little bit of information about yourself, where you have lived and a bit of your language experience?
Sure. Well, so like Andrea said, I'm Emily Walker. I was living in Washington, D.C. As a journalist, working as a journalist, covering different D.C. institutions when I met my husband, Adam, who's a Foreign Service officer with the State Department. So this was in about 2010 when we met, and he somehow convinced me to get married and move around the world with him. So that's what I've been doing for the past decade. We started off the adventure where, all honeymooners like to live, which is Sana'a, Yemen. So that was our first post. And then we went to Madrid, Spain. And then from there, we went to Jerusalem for 3 years. And then after that, we were in Morocco for 1 year, living in Rabat. And I'm currently in Algiers, where I've been for about 2.5 years.
Wow. I didn't realize that. Well, I guess I could have guessed, but so Adam proposed to you, and that meant that you essentially just had to sign on to this circus, which is moving around every 2 years, essentially, right?
Yes, yeah. When I met Adam in Washington, D.C., I loved my life in D.C., had a good job, had a cute apartment, had a great group of friends. And I met this guy who said he was just got into Foreign Service officer school with the State Department. I had no idea what that was. The night that I met him, he said, well, I really hope that I get to go to Yemen, which is what he bid on. That was his number one choice. And I had no idea where Yemen was, other than an episode of Friends. There's an episode of Friends where Chandler pretends that he's moving to Yemen just to get away from his girlfriend Janice, and that's like all I knew of Yemen. I didn't know where it was. So we dated for a while, kind of me thinking that it was just going to be a fling, sort of, but then fell in love and realized it was more serious. And yeah, getting married did to me mean that I had to go with him, because I wouldn't really be interested in maybe getting married and living my life apart from somebody. So yeah, getting married meant that I was moving to Yemen.
And was living abroad or traveling to kind of cultures outside of something familiar to you, was that something you had grown up with at all, or that you were familiar with before meeting Adam?
It was not anything that I was familiar with before meeting Adam. I did not grow up traveling abroad. Languages was not a thing that was important to me. But actually, a month before I met Adam, I had a friend who convinced me to go to Guatemala. She had a boyfriend who was Guatemalan and said, I'm here for the summer. Why don't you guys come and visit? With a group of friends. So that was a very, very exotic trip for me. So a month before I met Adam, I had traveled to Guatemala. I remember taking a bus by myself for 8 hours to this northern part of Guatemala. Really, that experience totally shifted what I thought that I was capable of doing by myself, kind of. And it opened up the world of travel to me a bit. So it kind of came at a good time when I met Adam. I was perceptive to it, but not familiar with a life of living abroad or travel.
So your family neither is, I don't know, I think I've noticed since I've started living abroad that there are some people who just kind of grow up in that world. So I think it's completely different to have these conversations with, I grew up in Minnesota. So in Minnesota, people don't, it's just not that common to meet somebody who's lived in Yemen for a few years. Whereas you do meet people who spend a lot of time traveling around, especially in military positions and things like that. So your family was not familiar with this at all?
Yeah, well, like you, I think that Minnesota and Michigan, where I grew up, are pretty similar. They have cultural similarities, I would say. So no, there is nobody I knew who grew up traveling at all. And, for a lot of my family, me having this life seemed crazy, but I think especially for my mom and dad, I think that they thought it seemed really exciting. And I think that they thought it fit. Remember my mom giving a speech at my wedding Well, I shouldn't call it my wedding. Adam always gets mad when I refer to our wedding as my wedding. She gave a speech at our wedding where she said, you know, Emily always wanted more. She wanted this life of travel, which wasn't true actually, but it's how my mom saw it, that she knew that I wanted to be out there. And I think that's a little bit because I went to school in Michigan, just an hour and a half, went to university in Michigan, just an hour and a half from where I grew up. But I kind of on a whim applied for this internship in Washington, D.C. So I moved to Washington, D.C., which was a big deal. Where I come from, most people are not moving to Washington, D.C. after college. Most people are staying in Michigan. So that was kind of a big deal. And the moment that I arrived to Washington, D.C., I honestly felt like I had found my people. It was an entire city of people who had something to say about everything and who were interested and interesting. So I think moving away from Michigan kind of maybe was the start of thing, or at least it was why my mom thought I wanted this life of travel.
Yeah.
And it's similar for you, I imagine, growing up in Minnesota.
Yeah, I do have a few, like, I mean, I come from a huge family. My mom has 6 sisters and my dad has 10 brothers and sisters. So between all of my cousins, there's 1 or 2 who have spent some time abroad. But at least for me, it was completely foreign to me. So I think I sort of had an addiction for it. The first time that I left and I went to Costa Rica, I got a little bit addicted to that feeling of, wow, this is so new and I'm learning so much. I felt like the learning curve was going straight up, and that if I went back home, I would suddenly stagnate on the line that I was at. So I just didn't want to get off that roller coaster, because it is kind of a roller coaster. I don't know. Has that been your experience? That, I mean, as much as there are these amazing things that you see and these amazing experiences, there's also this kind of like feeling of not having as much stability, and if you get sick and you're all alone, or arriving somewhere and just not knowing anybody, it feels so scary in a way. Or have you felt like that when you move? I guess you have a little bit more of a cushion with
So
Adam.
we have a cushion because we move with the U.S. Department of State. They find us a house, and the house is there ready for us. They pick us up from the airport and hand us a cell phone that already has a chip in it. You don't have to go find a chip in a foreign language. That's like literally the hardest thing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You don't want to sign up for our internet. They already did that for us. So that makes things a lot easier. And in a lot of ways, we have a set group of friends at the embassy, especially if it's kind of a smaller embassy like we're at now in Algiers. We do have people to do things with. I'm not saying that these people are going to be your best friends. There's still the whole other thing about actually finding your true friends while living abroad. But at least we have some people to socialize with, and it's set up. So yeah, I think that you probably have it a lot harder when you land in a new place, especially having to get like all those utilities set up. I think is a real nightmare.
Utilities is a hard thing, but I would say for me the hardest part has always been that knowing nobody. So I guess you still know nobody. I remember when I first came to Spain, I went to a sort of an Erasmus program because I was studying at the university doing a master. So they had sort of a international student gathering, and you felt the need to go to all of those events because more or less quickly everyone kind of found a group of friends that they would stick with over that year or 2 years. So it definitely felt useful to me, because other times that I've moved, I haven't had that built-in group of people that you could kind of count on to see several times a week or something like that. I noticed that you wrote, because we had a little bit of communication coming into this, and you said that you think that 3 years is a sweet spot for living in a place. And I have some thoughts on that too. So I'd love to hear how you came up with the 3-year theory.
Yeah. Well, so generally in the State Department, you have 2-year posts is kind of the most common thing. You live in a country for 2 years. If it's a dangerous place, like for instance, Iraq or Yemen, you live there for 1 year. But the sweet spot is when we get these posts where we're there for 3 years, because it takes 1 year to know anything, to kind of get an ear for the language, to make some friends. And then it takes 2 years, I think, to really like know the things. I'm a like super social person who likes giving people like recommendations. I like to have like Emily's guide for Madrid, Emily's guide. You know, I enjoy doing that. And it takes a long time to know all those places, to know the good restaurants, the place to get your art framed, like just those things. So I feel like that doesn't happen for 2 years. So then you have that nice extra year where you know the things, where you have friends, where you don't even really need to use Google Maps to drive around anymore. And that's like a nice kind of comfortable place to be for me.
And then wouldn't you rather keep on there a little bit longer once you reach that comfort level, or by then
Oh yeah,
after
that would be great.
Really?
That would be great. But we can't, you know, unless we quit our jobs with the government and then just decide to live somewhere, you know, like you're doing. So no, I think that living someplace longer than 3 years would be wonderful.
So if you had an ideal world, you would stay in one of these places that you've encountered, or you would just pick a place, or how would you go about that?
Well, I don't know, because when I think of like staying in a place, we have that option, I suppose, if we, you know, if my husband's not a foreign service officer anymore. And no, when you say that, that doesn't sound that appealing to me. So no, I think right now that it's actually really fun and fulfilling moving around every couple years.
Yeah. What have you found to be the most challenging, or the most, let's say, exciting, the other side of that, about living abroad? That's kind of a broad question when you've lived so many
Yeah.
places, but
Okay, well, should we do the positive first? Let's say most exciting. So I'm a writer also. So I think a lot about, sorry, my cat keeps
I love how the cat
in
just
front of the
loves
screen.
going directly in
She
front of the
wants
camera.
to, she knows right where that camera is. So as a writer, I'm very interested in inspiration and being inspired. It sounds like you are too, if you're talking about, you know, always learning from a new place. And I think that moving to a new place is inspiring. There's a reason that people jot things down on airplanes. There's a reason that people arrive to a new city and, oh, I've never thought about this way. And they're filled with all these ideas. So I think the best and most exciting part of it is that it is a constant source of inspiration. I'm seeing new things. I'm seeing things with new eyes, which I think is a struggle when you're seeing familiar things all the time. I have an expression I like to say that, like, I try to see the familiar with new eyes.
Yeah.
So when I'm walking down the same street, maybe every day for months and months, I try to notice new things. But when you travel, you just do. That's just there for you. So I think the endless inspiration is the most exciting part about living abroad.
And like, it piques your curiosity. It's not just inspiration. I think, at least from my perspective, there's so much to dig into everything. So something that you find inspiring, but then you wonder, why is it that it's so different here from the way I grew up? Or how have I not noticed this before? Or I think that your curiosity is constantly piqued by these kinds of things.
Exactly. But I would maybe like push back on that a little bit, that we can certainly dig into things at home, just like where we're from, or a place that you've been all the time. You know, it is just about noticing things and then following through on that noticing. Why is something that way? Noticing it. Like, for instance, at the end of my street here in Algiers, there's a hammam. So that's like, you know, a public bath with really beautiful tiles, and you go and kind of get a scrub, and someone gives you the best shower of your life and a massage. And I was bold enough to go to this in Morocco because I kind of like, I think I went with some people who knew what they were doing, but I've never been bold enough to go to the one down at the end of my street. I'm too scared about that they won't understand me, or that it's just going to be so different, and they're going to have me, I don't know, put me in a pile of naked people on the floor, and I'm going to be so uncomfortable, and I don't know. So I've just never gone. But every time I walk by it, which is like every day, I think about it, and I think, wouldn't it be a funny story if I went in and this awkward thing did happen? Or it's just like, I'm always thinking about it. But where I'm from, in Plymouth, Michigan, there are certainly weird houses you walk by where you're like, what do you think is going on in there? Or, things that, that we could follow through with our curiosity to notice, but kind of just don't because we become complacent about things.
Now you have a challenge of what you have to do sometime this week. You have to go to the hammam.
Okay, maybe challenge accepted.
What does it mean to have someone else shower you? Like,
I really do recommend doing this if you're this is great to do in Turkey, Morocco, and maybe Algeria. I'll report back on that. But you basically just go into a room, kind of like a steam room. You're naked except for like a little thong underwear that they give you. And then after you steam yourself, someone just comes and like, I don't know, they put lotions on you and then spray it off. You have like your own person who's giving you a shower. They're throwing water at you, then they're exfoliating, then they take this exfoliator to scrub every inch of you and then hose you off.
Are you just standing or sitting or laying down?
The best ones you're laying on like a heated marble slab. That's like the luxurious way to do it, but I've also done these before. I did a very awkward one of these with Adam in Morocco where we did a couples one in a very small area with a woman and we're just both standing there naked. These can be really awkward, but it's a cultural thing that I think a lot of people like doing.
Yeah, and I suppose depending on where your level of comfort is also, you might find it more or less uncomfortable, disturbing.
Exactly. And it's your level of comfort about, being naked while you're having an potentially awkward cultural situation.
I noticed that here when I first came to Spain. I remember being very aware of how I saw being naked as an American was so different from how Spanish people saw being naked. I mean, you spent time in Madrid, especially with the beach culture. Did you have that same?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think that for Americans living abroad, that is like one of the like things you notice the most where you're like, wow, we kind of grew up in a prudish naked culture. Like
yes.
You don't see anyone, often not even like your immediate family naked. And it's different everywhere else.
I remember,
especially good.
I was going to say, I remember like I played Ultimate Frisbee, which you know about because Adam also plays. But I remember one of the first tournaments, the boys would just take off their shorts and change into some other shorts, buck naked right there on the beach. And I remember thinking, you're doing that right in front of me? Like, I think he likes me or something. Like, my brain was like, why would he be there getting naked in front of me?
I remember being at an Ultimate Frisbee tournament. Yeah, with Adam. I was at an Ultimate Frisbee tournament with Adam in Spain. And there was a team, I forget where they were from, but there was one team that the guys and girls all went in after games and took butt naked showers together. And it was not at all sexual. It was just there.
Yeah, that's not very uncommon in the world, at least in this version of Ultimate Frisbee, like beach Ultimate Frisbee. It's definitely part of the thing.
Yeah. And I also want to add that I've lived in, some Middle Eastern and North African countries. So I'll say in Muslim countries, where there's an extra level of intimacy among women because you're not very out there or exposed in public. So when it's just women together, they're a lot more touchy, cuddly, naked. Like it's just a lot more, I don't know. And it almost feels, it's kind of like nice. It feels very special and intimate, I guess.
Yeah. So it's something you appreciate.
Yeah, it is. I think it is something I appreciate. I remember in Yemen, so in Yemen, women are completely covered head to toe, wearing gloves, and only their eyes are showing. They even have their faces covered. So, you don't really see what women look like. But I once went to a mosque and upstairs in the women's section, I mean, everybody just had everything off, not everything off. They were wearing like, jeans and a top and praying, and everyone was just kind of, I don't know, warm and welcoming and hugging me and things. And I just thought, oh, okay, so this is what it looks like when women are together.
It must feel so inviting after, in comparison to how a bit cold it is to be walking around with just your eyes showing all day. So that how stark that changes must feel more inviting.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned some of your favorite things about living abroad.
Oh yeah, but what's hard?
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing about living abroad is not feeling like myself for many months at a time. I, I seem to always forget every time that I move to a new place that I don't really feel like myself for about 3 months. I don't really get into my workout groove. I don't read, like I'll just watch TV. Um, feel I don't really know what I'm eating or like where the grocery store is. So I'll kind of just like eat whatever. And I definitely haven't found my people yet. So I just don't feel like a good version of myself. I don't feel like I'm, that interesting or, it's months every time to just really get into that groove.
Yeah.
So I think that's the hardest thing. Yeah.
And do you think like you spend that time watching TV because you're trying to get used to the culture and the language, or is that just because you don't know people, so it's kind of your
Oh,
backup
that would be
option?
that would be a nice noble thing. No, it's because I mentally don't feel sharp, so I think I just have the propensity to check out. No, when I say I'm watching TV, I'm watching like American Netflix shows. I'm
Okay.
not.
You're
So yeah, I don't know.
vegging.
I'm vegging. I have the propensity to veg for an extended period of time. But usually that feeling goes away after a few months. And actually, there's this thing called the cultural adjustment cycle. I'm not sure if you've seen this, if you Google cultural adjustment cycle. And it really does. I saw this, after I had moved to, I think it was after I had arrived in Jerusalem. And I like never really know when I'm in it. I mean, I think it's the same maybe when you're a little depressed that you don't know when you're in it. You didn't realize you weren't feeling like yourself until you're out of it. But I had one day in Jerusalem where I was in my Arabic lesson, and I had a really like warm, lovely teacher who we just talked about everything. But we were just doing something, just some other lesson, and I just burst into tears and could not
Oh,
stop crying. And she's like, "Why are you crying?" And I didn't even say anything. And she goes, I know it. This place is very hard. I know it. This place is very hard. And I'm like, no, it is. I guess that's why I'm crying. I don't know. But then I think when I saw this cultural adjustment cycle, that it's super common to like when you arrive to a place, awesome, super exciting. You're there, so much new to see. But then it kind of goes down often for 3 months where you're like, I don't understand so much. What am I doing? Was this the right choice? But then it usually spikes up, but then you have another dip somewhere too. But then ultimately like things kind of even out. So it is over a roller coaster, as you said.
I think also when you move somewhere new like that, there's so much going on in your head and so much to kind of take in that I just think we need more time inside of our brains to just roll those things around. And also, you're demanding so much willpower from yourself to have conversations with strangers, to try foods you've never tried, to walk down streets you've never been on, to in a way you're kind of like embarrassed a lot because you don't know when you're doing something that's inappropriate in the
Constantly.
culture.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think when you're in a more comfortable environment, you're not so assaulted by those things so often, or you can pick and choose when it's the right moment to do it. But when you move somewhere, it's just one after another after another. So I can see why just going home and watching American Idol on Netflix must feel like, okay, I'm in a comfort zone now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But that's so much of what living abroad is, right? That's well said. That like it's kind of like constant embarrassment. But when you're in like a really good mood in a good place, it's not really embarrassment. It's just like kind of like quirky, fun cultural engagements. And when
Yeah.
you're not in that place, it is just embarrassment and you want to get out of it.
And it's kind of the way you paint it in your own head too, because as
Exactly.
much as in the moment you might say like, oh, this is funny, this is quirky, they're just enjoying me. But then maybe you go home and you can't sleep very well that night because you're thinking, well, that kind of bothered me, or that was really embarrassing, or like, it's fine,
Yeah.
I don't mind. But at the same time, it does kind of go into your psyche. It's something I've been noticing a lot with posting videos on TikTok because with TikTok, I'm giving people grammar tips or pronunciation tips. And I've noticed that people get triggered. So they'll say, thank you very much, but I'm going to keep saying it the way I'm saying it. Or nobody cares if you use incorrect grammar, or that's just an accent. Pronouncing something wrong doesn't make you a bad person. And I'm like, oh, I totally am not saying that.
Yeah.
That was not my intention to express that. I'm an English teacher and I'm just here giving you guys tips in case you can find them useful.
Mhm.
And it's free and you don't have to watch my channel if you don't want. But
Yeah.
clearly, it's like a war that someone has in their own head where they're dealing with it regularly. And I think especially I've noticed that a lot of people living in the United States, I think we have a culture in the US where it is true that a lot of people haven't spent a lot of time abroad. It's
Mhm.
expensive, it's far away. We don't have so many countries around us like here in Spain.
Mhm.
So it's something that not a lot of people have the opportunity to experience. But that
Mhm.
does mean you can end up being a bit close-minded about what the experience is like being a
Mhm.
foreigner. So I've noticed
Mhm.
that some of them seem to have got hate or just laughed at, or I can imagine that it's really difficult.
Yeah.
You've never experienced that to that extent in any of the places that you've lived, or have you?
Utter humiliation or
I wouldn't say utter humiliation, but maybe some sort of hate or towards Americans. Do you tend to have a
oh,
good reception or?
we do have a good reception. I think that we've been lucky enough to live in countries where people think pretty favorably of Americans. And, while it might seem to us that, a lot of Americans don't travel, or especially in recent years can be hateful towards certain groups of people, that is not the perception that foreigners have of America. I mean, I've never seen that to be the perception that foreigners have of America anywhere. Foreigners think, it sounds funny also to say foreigners when I'm like a foreigner in this country. Who am I
Yeah.
talking? People who aren't American think that Americans are the most talkative, friendly, and open people. I have found that across the board. That's what Yemenis think about Americans. That is what Algerians think about Americans. It's what Spanish people probably think about Americans. So I don't know. We're in a unique position because we are representing America abroad.
Mhm.
So there've certainly been times when we don't agree with, I won't speak for my husband, when I don't agree with U.S. policy,
Mhm.
and we still represent America. But to me, that means that I represent in America. I represent the America how I see it and how I want to see it. So I like to tell people that America is more diverse than they could even imagine, both in geography and the people who are there, and in opinions, because you can have whatever opinion you want in America and you're free to express it. Which is another thing I'm always telling people, that Americans really value freedom of speech. I really value freedom of speech. It's enshrined in our Constitution. So not to go on a tangent, but these are all just kind of like the American values that I kind of tell people about. But I found that people I've encountered abroad really do have fond feelings for Americans.
Hmm. Yeah, I've had a similar experience too. Although I think that the experience is different depending on, I mean, here in Europe, the trip is much farther. So I think people
Mhm.
take traveling to Europe as something very serious. It's more expensive. It's more of like a cultural thing. Whereas I did live in Ensenada, Mexico for a while, which is just
Mhm.
across the border. A lot of cruise ships came in there. So you got a
Yeah.
lot of Americans that just got
Mhm.
on, like paid a cheap price to get on a cruise ship. They would land in Ensenada. I mean, they had these bumper stickers that people would put across their chests and dance on tables. It was not the best representation of Americans.
Yeah, I could see how you would be embarrassed of that. Well, what do Spanish people think about you as an American? Do they assume certain things about your personality? Do they have assumptions about Americans?
I think that one thing I like about living abroad is that I feel totally freed, because I think that they might have predisposed opinions about Americans, but they probably haven't known one very closely. So some of my closest friends, I'm the only American that they've spent this much time with.
Oh
And
wow.
I also think that I'm probably not a very typical American. I think I've had kind of a unique set of life experiences. So but they don't necessarily know that. So they might just think I'm representative of all Americans. And it just means that whatever I do is appropriate. Although they eat dinner at 10 p.m., if I prefer to eat dinner at 7, it's just, well, she's an American. And
Yeah.
if they wear boots and sweaters in December, even though it's like 80 degrees Fahrenheit out and I'm wearing flip-flops, they just think, oh, it's because she's American, which to a certain extent is true. But there are other things that I think are just related to me, but that they, as far as they know, it's just because I'm American. So I'm free from all social established rules. Have you ever experienced that?
Well, I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing because like you are, I mean, this is a little bit what diplomacy is, what you're doing. Okay. Because you are to them presenting the idea of America, and you might be the only American person they know. And they have these ideas about America, you know, and that's kind of what we're doing too.
Yeah, that's true. I never thought of myself as like a representative or doing diplomacy, but it's true that because of that, it's kind of the case.
Yeah, I think.
Do you ever feel a responsibility because of that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, also working for the government, you know, there's probably certain things that I can't say sometimes. I'm not sure if I added this. I work for the government because the U.S. State Department sometimes gives spouses or opens up certain jobs for spouses. So I also work in the public affairs section of the U.S. Embassy with Adam. He's the diplomat, but I work at embassies sometimes. So while I'm not the diplomat, I do feel like there's maybe certain things that I can't say. But in a social setting, I'm pretty open with my Algerian friends here. I will answer any questions that they have about America or what things are like in America. So I guess I feel a bit of a responsibility, but only in a good way. I don't feel any pressure that I have to be everything that America is. Yeah. I do maybe feel a little pressure to like know the history of America and things. Like if I tell somebody Thanksgiving's coming up and they say, oh, weren't there people who lived in America and then Europeans like killed them all? And I'm like, I need to know a bit of the history of our country so I can respond.
Have you studied history since leaving then in order to be able to answer more questions? Or do you just say, actually, I don't know that much about that?
Well, I think that living abroad and being kind of in the world of diplomacy has just made me much more interested in foreign policy. And because of that, I think I have definitely learned more about foreign countries' history, the countries that I live in. And I would say that I've probably learned more about American history as well.
Mm-hmm. This is just a curiosity I have, but I recently read a book in which the characters were in similar situations. It's actually what made me think to contact you for this podcast. But it was, I don't know if he was a diplomat, but the wife was moving around with him. And one thing that surprised me was like, it was so social. There were always these parties and dances and gatherings. And is it really like that?
Well, okay, so most diplomats would be like, no, everyone thinks that the life of a diplomat is all cocktail parties and martinis, and it's not. But it kind of is. Because I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's not like that when tomorrow I'm going to the Marine Ball at the U.S. Embassy. I mean, this is a line of work where you have a ball to go to every year.
Yeah, that's totally a good example.
Like the U.S.
I've never been to a ball.
I know. The U.S. Marine Corps, they actually, there's U.S. Marines who are like security guards. They guard embassies at every embassy in the world. And they have like an annual birthday party celebration, which is a ball. It's a diplomatic event and you put on a gown and you go. And the other thing that is very common is for various countries' national day parties. So like their 4th of July. So when we first arrived to Algiers, this was pre-COVID, a couple months before COVID, there was just a slew of Moroccan National Day party, Colombian National Day party, and it was a great way to meet other diplomats. So I'm a really social person who I actually like enjoy chit chat and things like that. So I like this life. I mean, doing this in a foreign language, doing the chit chat in a foreign language is very stressful, but
it must be. It must be like kind of interesting chit chat because you're also chit-chatting. You're also chit-chatting with other people who travel a lot and have thoughts about living in different cultures, and yeah, it must be a bit deeper than the typical chit chat where everybody's in the same pueblo talking about similar people or something like that. Have you experienced that?
Well, that's interesting because I don't know, sometimes you don't get very deep when you're just saying, oh, how long have you lived in Algiers? And what
Huh.
other cities have you traveled to? And how did you find that? Oh, it was beautiful. Thanks for asking. Sometimes you don't get really, really into the real deep conversation. It certainly is interesting people who I'm sure have a lot to say in everything, who know all of these things about foreign policy, and they're representatives of their own country that maybe you don't know anything about, and they have a lot to tell you. But no, it's still really, it's hard always in a social
Yeah.
setting to go up to people you don't know and to have a deep conversation. I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, actually, it's one of the things I get asked for by students a lot too, like network events, and
Mhm.
that people who are working in English speaking companies or have English speaking clients, and they don't really necessarily need help with their business English, but
Mm.
they really desperately want help with that conversation, side talk when they're
Mhm.
having dinner with clients and it's just social. That's where they really
Mhm.
panic.
Mhm. Do you give
Yeah.
them any good go-to tips?
I mean, it's a program I'm working on with a friend of mine. We want to develop something about that because it's true that I think there's a need for it. And immediately, my brain has always gone towards helping people with the more business and formal related vocabulary. But
Mhm.
it's interesting to, especially from an American perspective. So, of course, we have all of these phrases or things that we say with other Americans. But in these situations, it tends to be not only Americans, but other foreigners. So you don't want to give them all of these phrases or phrasal verbs or idioms to help
Yeah.
them because actually it's not useful. So you just want to give them
No.
something to help them to have their own personality
Yes.
and still be able to relax and have fun and communicate. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I don't
Mhm.
think I've nailed it yet, but I would like to develop that program sometime in the future.
Yeah, because maybe it's not it's you have to think of the true question that you wanted to know if you're sitting next to someone you didn't know, and think about how you can say it, because you're never going to get anywhere with nice weather we're having. Yes, it
Yeah.
is nice weather.
Yeah, it ends up feeling so kind of hopeless, like I'm
Yeah.
not getting anywhere here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a real language struggle. Maybe we should talk about my language or lack of language too in this life. My husband Adam is like a super linguist, loves learning languages, and also gets paid sometimes to just be in language school for years at a time.
Yeah.
This was when we were in Morocco. He was just in Arabic school for the full year. We do this in DC sometimes. But more importantly, he's just a language person who just like loves it. He gets a lot of joy from it. I don't. I'm a communication person. I like to communicate, but I don't really enjoy learning languages. Here in Algeria, people speak French, and people speak a local type of Arabic that's called Darija. And it's kind of a combination between French and Arabic, but then it's words you've never heard that sound Arabic like, but are so I don't know that language at all. And I've been learning French for 4 years, so I can sometimes communicate with people here. But I remember when we first arrived, we got invited. We met this new friend, this kind of like dashing Algerian guy who invited us to his 40th birthday party. And he sent us this like kind of cryptic invitation where he's like, come to my 40th birthday party. All you have to do is get yourself on this plane and fly to the Sahara Desert, and everything will be taken care of. So it was like, well, that sounds crazy exciting, and why not? Let's do it. But I was also worried because I knew it would be a bunch of Algerians. I just arrived. Like, what am I going to talk to them about? How is their English? Can I talk to anyone the whole weekend or no? Um, but we just went. We flew to the desert, and remember the moment everyone on the plane was going to this party. Essentially, we all got in a bus to drive us to this other Sahara Desert town, and everybody was going to the party. They had packed drums with them and like tambourines, and everyone just started singing on the bus. And I was kind of like, this is incredible. I almost had tears. I'm like, this is so cool. Like they just brought these instruments and this is naturally happening. Only singing Arabic songs, I didn't know what they were saying or anything, but I really just kind of had the feeling like, okay, there's other ways you can connect with people when you don't speak the language. And we went on to have this like magnificent weekend in the desert that was really just like indescribably beautiful. And I still see some of those people. We're kind of in the same friend circle. We really cannot communicate in words. Still.
That's when you need to pull out your drum.
I know, really. I just feel like we kind of look at each other and we know that we had this like great time together, and that was our connection.
Cool. We have to wrap up. Do you have any?
Oh, that was so fast.
Yeah, I know. I always feel like it's so fast, and it's tempting to just let them go on, but I know that keeping them short is a better option. Mm-hmm. We can always do it again.
Okay, I have a lot more to say, so I would love to.
Cool. Do you have any final thoughts or things you want to say before we hang up?
Well, I feel like I maybe made living abroad sound really difficult, and it is. But I think that it's super just worthy and really like exciting and enriching life to be constantly learning new things about other cultures, even if it means embarrassing yourself on a daily basis.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Great. It was a pleasure. I hope to see you in Spain sometime.
Yeah. Hopefully on an island with drums or something like that.
I'll bring my drum.
Bye, Emily.
Take care.